Well, hello everyone, and thank you once again for joining me here. Now, I wanted to do something a little bit special today, and I'm going to tell you right now, I got my trusty little laptop, well, it's not even a laptop, it's a netbook here. See? This is my travel companion, and to practice this whole thing would probably take days and days and days and still require 300 cuts in editing. So I'm going to read directly off this document that I turned up. And well, to try to make a long story short, I've been seeing a lot of stuff. This listing of on the Lacey Act of the new constrictor species being listed on it, it's bothered me a lot. Not necessarily the listing itself, because I kind of expected it. I was kind of prepared for it in advance, which I personally believe so many people should have been prepared for it. But the response from the reptile community has kind of bothered me, and I'm seeing a lot of stuff being said out there that's just simply not true, and it makes me realize that a lot of people don't really understand what this is about. Now, I've got this document right here on the screen. It's a PDF file. I'll put the entire text on the website, link below, as well as link to the original document if you don't believe what I put on my website. And granted, I believe this was drafted in 2012 with the initial listing of the Burmese python and African rock python, but should still hold true today. Now, you know our government is wonderful at creating laws that contradict other laws, so I'm sure somebody can find an argumentative or non-supporting document. But I wanted to go through this. It's almost like a question and answer thing on what the Lacey Act really is and what it means for people specifically that keep these large constrictor snakes. So we'll start off. Title: What the listing of the 4 constrictor snakes as injurious means for people who own snakes. The injurious provisions of the Lacey Act, 18 U.S.C. 42 and 50 CFR 16, hereafter referred to as the Lacey Act, prohibit the importation, interstate movement, or acquisition, quote, obtaining species from across state lines or through importation of listed species. With the listing of 4 constrictors as injurious, Burmese pythons, northern and southern African rock pythons, and yellow anacondas, some activities would not be affected by the listing. However, other activities that are currently being carried out with the species would be affected. For these activities, the service could authorize interstate movement or import for one of 4 reasons: medical, scientific, zoological, or educational purpose. Now, I'm going to try really hard to keep my opinion out of this. I just want to read you the facts as they are right here. This document comes right from the Fish and Wildlife Service website. So, again, hopefully I can refrain from my personal opinion and just recite this document to you. We'll see how that works out. Moving on. Likewise, there are provisions of the Lacey Act that put certain restrictions on how specimens that have previously been permitted for import or interstate movement might now affect how your snake needs to be housed. See permitting below. Moving on. Ownership or possession of legally obtained species. The listing does not affect ownership of the 4 species. Now we're up to 7. Correct me if I'm wrong. I believe we're up to 7, possibly 8. Provided that the animals were obtained prior to the effective date of the rule, obtained within the state you live after the effective date of the rule. The injurious wildlife provisions of the Lacey Act only apply to interstate movement, import, and acquisition through interstate movement or importation of listed species. If you already own the snake and do not move it across state lines, no permit or other authorization is required. So, not to go right back on what I said, my own opinion, they are not coming for your snakes. If you already have them, you can keep them. You can continue to obtain them within your state. You just cannot bring them in from out of state yet. But let's move on. Where were we? Buying or obtaining snake within your state of residence. The Lacey Act does not regulate interstate. I'm sorry, I mispronounced that word. That's what made me look at it real quick. The Lacey Act does not regulate intrastate commerce of attaining listed specimens within the state where you live, as long as the snake was within your state before the listing becomes effective, or the snake is born within the state after the listing. No permit or authorization is required to purchase or possess one of these snakes. There you go, right there. They're not coming for your snakes. You can continue to buy these snakes within your state. You just can't buy them outside of the state. Moving your snake within your state of residence. The Lacey Act does not regulate intrastate, I almost mispronounced it again, movement of listed species moving from one part of your state to another. As long as you're not leaving the state, crossing state lines, no permit or authorization is required to move your snake. Breeding of your snake. The Lacey Act does not regulate breeding of listed species. This means that there are no prohibitions for you to breed your snake, provided you do not subsequently move the snake across state lines. This would mean that if you're commercially breeding one of these species, or even breeding as a hobby, you can continue to breed. However, as stated above, you could not move them across state lines without a permit or authorization. Now, this is a very important note that we'll move on to a little bit later in this document. However, as stated above, you could not move them across state lines without a permit or other authorization. Exporting snakes. The Lacey Act does not regulate exportation of listed species. This means that you can export listed snakes without acquiring authorization under the Lacey Act. These species are, however, listed in Appendix 2 of the Conservation of International Trade of Endangered Species of tongue twisted, of wild fauna and flora, and would require a city's export permit from the service. Excuse me. While the Lacey Act does not address export, it does regulate interstate movement. Therefore, while you can export specimens of these 4 species, again, we're at 7 or 8 by now, you cannot cross state lines while transporting specimens to an airport, and the plane cannot land in another state while in transit to its final destination. Example, the plane carrying the specimens cannot take off from Dallas, Texas, and make a stop in Los Angeles, California on its way to Hong Kong. By landing in California, the specimens are involved in an interstate movement that is prohibited without authorization under the Lacey Act. Now we move on. What the hell did I just do? I think I just hit page down instead of... Okay. Moving on. Public display. The Lacey Act does not regulate public display that is not associated with an import, interstate movement, or acquisition, buying or obtaining listed specimen in association with the import or interstate movement. Therefore, providing the specimen does not taken across state lines or imported in order to conduct the public display. No permit or authorization is required under the Lacey Act. Educational programs can be conducted with these snakes that any requirements that may be in place on the specimens through the previous permitting process are met. See permitting below. Permitting. This is where we're at the interesting point that can be taken a few different ways. And I have a little problem with the language here in this permitting section, but we'll continue. Permitting. As stated above, importing and listing specimens moving across state lines or acquiring a specimen when interstate movement or importation is involved requires authorization in the form of a permit or letter of authorization from the service meaning the Fish and Wildlife Service, obviously, before the activity occurs. Very important, before the activity occurs, not after, before. That's now the law. Like it or not, that's now the law, before. The Lacey Act is very specific on the types of activities that can be authorized. However, only legitimate medical, scientific, zoological, or educational activities can be the basis for issuing authorization or permits, interstate movement, or acquisition under the Lacey Act. Here's a very important gray area of the Lacey Act. If you wish to conduct one of the otherwise prohibited activities under the Lacey Act, you must submit an application to the service requesting authorization, Form 3-200-42C below. The application will ask questions about the activity you wish to carry out and give you an opportunity to explain how this activity would meet the permit issuance criteria under the Lacey Act and its implementing regulations. If a permit or otherwise authorization is granted by the service, you will be able to carry out your proposed activity. Please note that there may be other federal, state, or foreign permitting requirements. The service will assist you in meeting these needs at the time you apply for authorization under the Lacey Act. The permit or authorization may include... Where'd I go? Oh shit. I'm hitting the wrong button. May include one or more permit conditions that would apply to how you conduct proposed activity to ensure the safety of the animal and reduce the risk that specimens would cause an adverse impact on the environment, the basis for which species was listed as injurious under the Lacey Act to begin with. One requirement is that all injurious wildlife permits or authorization is the requirement that the specimen would be maintained in a double escape-proof containment at all times. This requirement, explained further below, means that the snake covered by the Lacey Act authorization must be maintained in a double escape-proof containment through any interstate movement or importation, as well as while the snake is permanently or temporarily housed in your home or facility. The requirement also extended to any offspring of the specimen. In practical terms, this means that once a snake is covered by a permit, it must be maintained in a double escape-proof containment for the rest of its life. This requirement, as well as extension to the snake's offspring, is to ensure the specimens of the service has permitted a part of otherwise prohibited activity do not cause the specific environmental damage that the listing under the Lacey Act was designed to prevent. Since the leading reason for the listing of the 4, again now 7 or 8, species under the Lacey Act was to prevent colonization or further spread of the species in areas of the United States where the specimens have been known risk to native wildlife or habitats, the housing requirement is necessary to prevent unintentional release of permitted specimens. Now we're on page 3 now, we could continue, but most of this, the rest of it is just, well, we'll hit on this part for a second. Importation of snakes. As stated, the Lacey Act only allows imports to occur if the proposed of the import is medical, scientific, zoological, or educational. The current application form 3-200-42 would need to be completed and submitted to the service for processing. The rest of this document is going along the lines of the application process, helping you fill it out if for some reason you have a reason for interstate transport and everything. So again, I'll put this in text in its entirety, and this is dated February 13, 2012, which was the initial listing of the Burmese African rock pythons in green anaconda, I believe it was, but still is effective with the reticulating python and other pythons, and the believed to be boa, which I'm pretty sure most people believe is going to be added soon. So, point being, I guess the easiest way to break it down is, number one, like I said, they're not coming after your snakes. If you have them, you can keep them. If you want to continue to build your collection, you can continue to build your collection as long as the easy way you purchase within your state. I like to think most popular species such as Burmese pythons, forgive me for not using their scientific name, but red-tailed boas, I believe most states have like a pretty decent selection, so it shouldn't really be an issue with those. Reticulated pythons and any of the anaconda species I really don't know much about at all, so I'm not 100% sure how the market is for those. But an easy way to break it down is, we're on YouTube right now, for example. I'm talking about this on YouTube, you're listening to it on YouTube, and I'm sure most of you have clicked away, but if you're still here, this is an easy way to break it down. I might get flagged for this article under a copyright law or something because I talked about something that something automatically put a claim on, and it's very easy for me to dispute this copyright and put fair use. Number one, I talked about regulations and national laws, which public office is public property and therefore public domain. But I can just put a simple fair use claim on it and get that copyright claim against me removed. So For a good example on moving forward, if you were, for example, breeding these species and doing something under the premise of conservation through captive breeding, then you can potentially claim a scientific reasoning for importing or exporting these animals. All I'm saying is now you guys know what it says. It's right here. I just read it to you. You can rewind 15 and 22 seconds to listen to it again, but I doubt you will. I understand it's kind of long and drawn out, and I'm monotone and ugly and have a stupid YouTube channel, but bear with me for a minute. It's not, I mean, it's terrible. It really is terrible. I think a lot of people are blowing it a little more out of proportion than it really is. And a lot of the, like I believe I said at the beginning, if I can remember 15 minutes ago, you can take my snakes when you pry my guns from my cold dead hands. That's irresponsible to say that. I'm going to continue to ship these snakes across state lines. I don't care what you say. That's irresponsible to do that. You people are the problem right now. You're doing an injustice to your community by saying this kind of stuff. And my main purpose for making this video is I wanted you guys to know what it said, what it's about, and you know, there's nothing wrong with people voicing their opinion, how they feel, how bad they're in opposition of this kind of stuff. I'm in opposition for it myself, and I'm voicing that opinion right now. I don't believe or agree with any of these listings at all, but we need to make sure 10,000% that we're giving accurate information, that we're being respectful and responsible with the way we present ourselves to the world. Because the world right now is watching. A precedence is being set, as Andrew Wyatt said several years ago in the first interview I did with him. A precedence is being set. Back then they were trying, now they are. And we need to be the better person. We need to fight the good fight and do what we need to do. So, that being said, thank you for watching. I appreciate it, everybody. I would greatly appreciate it if you guys would share this across every aspect of the internet you can, just to make sure we're getting accurate information out there. And yeah, good times. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you stuck it out to the end, but I understand if you didn't. Like I said, we're going on almost 20 minutes now. So anyway, we'll see you very soon.